Greetings, everybody. I'm Mark Moore, your host, and we're speaking here with Jermaine, and we have an introduction to the series I want to do real briefly. This is the Future of Work series put on by Connected Leader, and our theme for the next 2 weeks and last week as well is around redesigning business for human well-being, connection, and effectiveness. And we're really looking at these trending topics right now that are really disruptive, from the pandemic and other pre-issues that were going on prior to the pandemic around retaining talent and connection at work. And the statistics right now are really big. You know, there's 65% of the people disengaged at work. 40% of the workforce is actively seeking another job. And there's all this challenge around work-life balance. You know, how do you possibly pull this off with remote work, all the business disruptions in the markets, and just personal resilience for employees and managers? What does that look like today to move into a culture, let's pull it from the future, that allows people to cope with stresses like this, not just temporarily, but ongoingly? And what can we do that has been an obvious solution, but not picked up because the need was not great? You know, I want to provoke some of these conversations in our conversation today. And just a little bit about me. I've been working during the last 30 years around connecting human beings to the natural world. There's a international network I'm a part of, and I'm a leadership development role in that international network around how do communities function or not function well in relation to the natural world, and what's the consequence of that? What's the consequence in terms of childhood development, resilience in communities, the way in which the economy functions or doesn't function well? And lately, I've been bringing this work, the last 10 years or so, into the workplace, because there's a bundle of tools that we've learned that help human beings thrive under changing conditions. So I've been in Nike in the pandemic, as well as brought into Google recently. We're about to launch a whole piece of work around transforming issues of loneliness and burnout into a thriving workplaces of innovation. So we'll talk more about that as well. So let me introduce Jermaine here. Welcome, Jermaine. Great to have you.
Hey, Mark,
And
thank you.
Jermaine hails from Ontario, and today he'll be speaking on the talent panic, how leaders treat their teams matter. There's a whole bunch of issues going on right now that are causing managers and leaders to really question, how do we retain talent? How do we attract talent? How do we treat our employees so that they are getting what their needs are met? There's a big gap right now. So Jermaine is the architect of people first, a human-centric leader who cares. And to attract and retain talent, he says organizations must be more attuned to the needs of their employees as people, whether in office, hybrid, or remote. People expect better and want to have a say in how things work. So he's going to talk about servant leadership and all sorts of other things. So let me just get right to it. Hi, Jermaine. Welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Hello, everyone.
Yes. So big topics. We're not, the experts of waving a magic wand, but I'm really wanting us to provoke thinking around how do we engage new ideas and new practices in the workplace. Because I had a teacher once who said, the greater the need, the greater the result. And I think we've got some great needs on the table and time to take some new risks. So how would you define the problem right now? What are you seeing?
Well, actually, the problem is quite serious on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think it's really kind of a mini revolution, if you will, that we're seeing more and more attention and focus put on people. On the organizations that don't get that yet, they will later, but it's really critical. over the past 3 years or so, we've seen a lot of innovation, rapid changes, but the pandemic has kind of, thrown jet fuel in all of this, and it's become really, really difficult for many. And, I don't want to discard the fact that some people in many industries have actually lost their jobs. Industries have been affected badly, travel, restaurant, all this stuff, right? Which is too bad because, as happens very often, there are the people who maybe have least resources to cope. But for many others and white collars like most of us, it hasn't been the case necessarily. But there still is quite a bit of anxiety and maybe not quite the comfort level that you would expect in people, just because of what happened in the past 18 months and how it was handled. So first thing I would say is how companies handled the crisis, how they treated their employees during the crisis initially, is really, really affecting their ability to retain staff and to hire top talent.
Hmm.
That's a real big problem.
So the initial reaction. Do you have a case study of something that didn't go well? I want to hear the challenge.
Well, I can give you some examples, and it didn't necessarily lead to huge attrition in that particular case. But last year, for example, I joined a software in the cloud company to help them introduce a new operating model to go from maybe product specialists to consulting services oriented organizations. And some of the members on the team, I was hired remotely. I was interviewed and hired remotely. Some of them were interviewed and hired remotely. For me, it didn't really make much of a difference because I've been working remotely fairly effectively for many years. But take, for example, new grads or people who have young children at home, right? Suddenly having to work remotely, not being prepared. I have a closed office. You probably do too, but not everybody does. So people had to take calls from the couch, from the living room, from the bedroom sometimes, right? And it's a big challenge, and we really had to take the time and adjust to that. And luckily, in that case, the culture was such that, hey, yes, let's hold on, let's make sure we can make this work for people. Let's have some flexibility. But companies who didn't do that really, really are seeing the impact today because people are just leaving.
Hmm. Yeah, I was working with Nike at the time. I just started a year-long scope of work with this VP in the engineering side, and there at sometime around February, it just started hitting like this isn't going to happen. We have to actually go remote, and that department was responsible for the entire migration of the company. So they went from 3,000 to 70,000 people, and they were responsible for all of the software working and all of the hardware and all of the communications, and it was chaos in at the center of that. And I got to see how they were really leaned on hard, and they didn't get a break in any of this. They were working way more hours than prior to that. Even after that, it just kept rolling out. There was this 12-hour a day expectation of being online. People were unclear of whether they were going to get fired because the wave of economic rollout started happening. So they were like, we need to downsize. We need to end all corporate contracts like mine. We need to start moving through the whole chain of people who are just waste, and all. They were really hardcore about it. So people thought, well, we just have to, stay online as much as possible and do things. And then we started seeing the statistics of burnout coming out and mental health crises. And I started seeing, anecdotally, I started seeing them myself. And the VP called me and said, could you spend some time with this person because it doesn't look good, you know? So I want to imagine a world where we don't set ourselves up for these destabilizations, that we build a house of cards and we're kind of getting away with it maybe quarter to quarter, or we have these rash solutions, and there's a whole bunch of people out of work. that we build some proactive ways of connecting, of building resilience, and having a thriving culture, so that doesn't happen. There's a lot in that wish that I have, but I think there's some places that we can draw from that can take us in a whole new direction. So that's what I'm thinking, right? But let's talk a little bit about, before we get into solutioning and frameworks and things. Tell me a little bit about your background around. I saw a post that you did on LinkedIn here. You shared it with me, and you were emphasizing connection, communication, and collaboration, which those sound like good big words to work on. But the key that attracted me was that you were sourcing these ideas from nature. So tell me about your upbringing, your connection to nature that's created this foundation.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for reading my post on LinkedIn. Um, Actually, I grew up. I was born and grew up in Eastern Ontario. Grew up on a small dairy farm, and we had a wooded area actually with some nice maple trees. And my dad did maple syrup, small sugar bush operation. But because of that, I was always tied closely to what was going on around us in terms of crops for the animals or the trees, everything else. And I've always kept that, and I still always enjoy going for a hike or bike ride, and enjoy nature. In that post, I was talking about how nature connects and protects different living creatures, protect each other in ways that we don't even see. It's actually underground culture, if you will, where and if people are interested, they can look at it, and we can provide links. But there's a whole network underground, which actually starts with mushrooms. Mushrooms provide a network so that trees can communicate and basically alert on if there's something a bad wind coming or insects or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea when you think about that, and by the way, we're a big family. I'm the ninth of 10 kids.
Oh
So
my.
you have to learn how to get along, and you also have to learn about teamwork because there was a lot of work to do. And my dad was pretty strict that, we all share in the work. So you learn about teamwork, you learn about connection, communication, you learn about how to depend on each other, right? And a strong asset for any coworker is to be dependable, right? And so for people to be able to put all of this together, communicate, connect, network, um, organizations have to think of people as their main asset. Just like if you own a farm, the land is your main asset, and the animals and everything else. So in an organization, the people are your main asset, and you have to make sure that whatever you do focuses on what will work for people, not necessarily an idea that comes from somewhere. A strategist or a consultant or an executive says, "Okay, I want this. I want us to do this from now on." Basically, it's not quite that easy. And this is where culture comes in. And culture is an organization's trump card, I think, in terms of retaining and keeping their people.
So
And to me,
let's pause there for a second, because I want to go back to the underground culture you mentioned with trees. And I think what attracted me is the unseen aspect of that. And as soon as you said underground culture or unseen culture, I thought, well, that might be redundant, you know, because culture is often intangible or invisible. There is a way that work gets done. There's a way in which collaboration happens, right? But you can't prescribe it in a sense in a meeting. And sometimes when things are prescribed, you notice how culture reacts. Like, we don't do things like that here. Um, when you introduce new ideas into a culture, there can be a record scratch, and people are like, "Wait, what? What is this? Why are we doing it like this? That's not the way we do things." So, this analogy you're making, it sounds like this is like a theory of change premise that I don't want to skip over too quickly. That there are unseen connections in the forest that we previously experienced. This is the contrast, I think, to the insight. There's a big piece of literature that came out based on science that said, how trees talk to each other, the secret life of trees. So you can look up that reference. But prior to that, I can see in my own story, but I'm sure in others, that there's a perception that a tree is an individual thing. And there is a worldview of fragmentation that's unnoticed in that experience. Our experience that a tree is an individual, but it's really the worldview that's seeing it that way. We even use a noun to describe it. That's a maple tree. That's a thing. And what's really sparks the imagination with this idea that there's an underground network of mycelium stewarding the transport of energy and sugars and other disease resistance chemicals between trees. Like I saw the image in the video that showed that there could be a mother tree and a large canopied forest, and two younger maple sugar saplings are next to it. They're not going to get proper light from the sun to convert into sugar. So the mother tree will actually send sugar underground to keep the trees growing through the roots. And mycelium does that interconnection. So this is about mycelium, but it's also about that, well, what is a tree then if they're interacting that way? And another example that was illuminating was a tree that was at the end of its life cycle and it was dying will instead of just hanging on, it'll dump all of its extra nutrients for other trees nearby it to take up. So it was kind of like a bequeathing, you know. So if this is the way the world actually works, it's starting to shift my worldview from fragmentation to a kind of whole systems interconnectedness. And so what I'm putting together here, and I think about this a lot, is so how could human culture um, be mindfully through the worldview that we're interconnected versus seeing this is the person who has that job, this is the person who has that job, and these two silos don't communicate to each other, or hierarchically, I'm not responsible for those things, right? How do we begin to awaken our worldview as work gets done so we start to see the interdependence, how material flow or energy flow or care can take place?
Yeah, and that's I mean you've described that very well. I saw that video as well on the secret life of trees. It's fabulous. But as people, we think we're individuals, but we're also all interconnected. And so an organization is made up of people. It's simple as that, right? So if we want the organization to work smoothly and work effectively, people have to work together. The silos, I mean, I know they still always come back, but we try all the time to get rid of silos. And it's always part of our job, I think, as a leader, to facilitate collaboration with other organizations, right? Make that easy for your people, introduce them, and ourselves work with other leaders. And that's, lead by example or lead by walking around. But basically, we need to make that the way things are done. And when you start a new job, and going back to culture, when you start a new job, sure, you learn about what are the written values, what is the mission statement, and all of this good stuff. And typically, you want to work for a company where you're aligned with those, with those objectives and the purpose of the company. But to learn really what happens in that organization, most of that, as you say, it's never written down. It's just how things are done around here is you have to start asking questions. So your first day, your second day, your first week, you ask questions, how's this done, or who do I talk to, and then you see if there's really collaboration or not. And if there isn't, it's a real challenge. We've all worked in organizations where, I worked in one where teamwork was seen as a weakness, frankly. Just simple as that, right? Figure it out. Why are you asking me? Figure it out. And I've worked in other organizations where you only have to look up and somebody says you need help, right? You need something. Or in a leadership role, you make sure that some of the more junior people are supported and led by the more senior members of your team. and you ask the more senior members of your team, what can we do to make things better, and what comes next? I've had, for example, a lot of success uh, developing expertise and resources, not because I knew what was going on, but because they knew, and I asked them. I say, what should we be learning that's going to come up in the next 6 months, or the next year in the tech sector, for example? They
Uh-huh.
had a lot more of the answers than I did. And therefore, we were always well prepared, better prepared than most other teams, right?
Mm.
So all of this means that you always have to rely, you should be able to rely on someone else, and someone else should be able to rely on you, so that when there is an area or something that where you need to have 2 or 3 people work together, or there's an issue, you can resolve it quickly.
Yeah, this is cool. I did some long-term work in a smaller company. So one thing that's differentiating out for me is like how this plays out in 200 person companies versus 70,000 person companies. So my mind just kind of went into two directions. But on the larger company, I want to talk about this idea that you ever seen people work towards building a fiefdom and a head count and a kind of stabilized level of responsibility, and they don't want to let it go because it might mean change, and it might mean losing their job, or it might mean having to be flexible. So there's something reinforcing in the culture that allows that behavior to continue. And then when you try to collaborate with them, there can even be these unseen backroom things that are going on that are right. So there's that kind of large organizational uh, tension, or kind of what's the word, kind of like friction, that makes it difficult to just implement these ideas. So we'll just put that on the shelf here for something to talk about. In the smaller organization, this was a high growth group that was working with emergency first responder agencies at the federal level and state level. They had this great software of linking people together. And I proposed these ideas of working with ecological thinking and design as part of leadership development. So we put together 3 initiatives simultaneously that were working on the pre work for collaboration. So, that's kind of the big question. If collaboration is not an instant yes, what's the pre work required for that? And I was working at the level of worldview and self reflection. Because if we don't have an understanding of ourself and the limitations with which how we see the world, it's really difficult to do that from the outside, right? And it also builds some personal agency in terms of leadership development. So we created, something for all the managers and the leaders of the company, but we did this other thing where we did cross-functional team cohorts. And we were slowly moving through the whole company in these cohorts. We were put together teams of 8 or so, and were from all over. And we built a conversation over about 16 weeks. And we worked with these living systems principles. And so one of the ones that you're mentioning right now, which is like responding to people in need, from a certain worldview, that could be like a bad idea. It's like, well, what am I going to get out of it? Or I'm too busy right now, or no one, I'm always all alone in things. That's a certain position. So we did nature connection routines on an offsite to actually move people into relationship with nature again, as a core aspect of their kind of leadership development process. But then at work, we did these conversations around living system principles, and one of them is called reciprocity. So you'll see in the natural world quite a bit that what people give, or what aspects of the natural world give to the whole ecosystem, they get something different back. It's not a same equation. And I think with people, it's similar, that we all have something unique and different to offer, and we show up differently under certain circumstances. We certainly have our job title, but we all do that job title differently if we had it. So showing up for somebody in their time of need is like kind of a social bank but the social bank is much larger than just like, I got $20, I'm going to get my 20 back next time I'm in trouble. It's almost like people are showing up for me when I'm in need and I don't even know it, or they listen better, for when I'm trying to chew through a problem because I help them with a problem. There's an expansion of like, this person is, their success is my success. So that principle is called reciprocity as opposed to quid pro quo. So how does that speak to what you're talking about?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Reciprocity. I like that a lot. And it's like when we say there's give and take in the world, and people will only take. Doesn't take very long where we see through that, right? But when people give, as you say, it doesn't mean you're going to get the same thing back, but you give and you'll get something back later, and some totally maybe unrelated, but doesn't matter. And if somebody helps you and you get something, you help someone else. Maybe you're paying it forward. You're helping someone who will succeed later or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that is definitely very, very key. And it also made me think, when you do that, you can plant seeds. It doesn't mean that you immediately have to jump in and help somebody, but you can plant seeds. And if somebody needs help, you can say, well, I can help in the following areas, right? If something comes up. And it's the same as in nature, where, if you plant a seed, and you put something in the ground, very top quality seed, the best you can find, you leave it there for 10 years, who knows what you're going to get? You may not get anything, right? And I'll tell you another story on the farm when I was a young boy. Um, my mom had a garden along the house, and there was a little sapling, maple tree sapling that grew there, just a few inches, when I noticed it. And I said, hey, look, this is really cool, right? A tree is growing. And she said, yes, well, the tree is growing, but if you want it to grow, you'll have to move it. Not going to be able to grow there too close to the house.
Mm.
So I took that tree and I transplanted it near a fence, right? And I go back, and I was there maybe 3 years ago, back on the farm I come from, just to see that tree is now huge, and it's doing so well. But who would have thought that this is like 40 years ago or something like that, right? But still, having to take the time, and this relates to career development, leadership development. You have to always make sure that you help where you can, and you take care of those that you can help. And again, the old saying, you reap what you sow. And if you don't plant anything, you're not going to get very much at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned maybe this is the idea of servant leadership. You know, what is a motivation for being a servant leader if there isn't an instant ROI? And I'm asking that in that way because I'm pointing at a mindset, that you could call the competitive or perhaps extractive mindset. Perhaps it's based on some aspect of society, or a certain personal developmental injury that took place. That's now kind of their strategy is survival oriented. Um, how do you speak to that mindset to move from extractive, or what can I get out of this? And there might be lipstick on that, or there might be a smile, right? But really, that's kind of the core nature. How do you move that towards extending trust into the process of servant leadership?
Yeah, I talked about servant leadership a lot, but actually, I didn't know what it was years ago. It's only when I came across it that I realized that that's what helped me as a leader. Um, because I'll tell you, the first time that I was given a significant promotion to lead a group, I was totally surprised. And I told my boss, I said, well, why me? There are other people who are better than I am, right? And so it just costed a bit. And anyway, and this reminds me of one of my friends, Patrick McKenna, wrote a book called first among equals, which I read at the time. Um, and it's quite interesting. It's a mindset that if you're going to be a leader, you no longer should be thinking about yourself, but you should be thinking about helping the people who are in your group, because then you're helping the whole group grow, right? And so, and really, I could challenge to say, if you promote someone who's not ready to do that, they shouldn't be in that job. They're not leader material, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can only be leader material if you're ready to help your people. Now, helping people doesn't mean you're a wimp and they'll tell you where to go kind of thing. It means that you get to know, the way I do it is I get to know each person as an individual first. Then you can understand really what motivates them, what their strengths are, what their
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take that from each individual and then look at your team as a whole and say, okay, here's what we can do. Here's where we're strong. Here's where we're not. And then this is where again you do the collaborative aspect of getting one person to help the other or support the other. And I can guarantee you there is a ROI. It's a lot more immediate than you think, but it's not personal ROI. And if you're looking just for the personal credit, you're in the wrong job again. If you're
Mm-hmm.
looking personal credit, you might as well be an individual contributor, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody needs to be in a people leadership role.
Mm-hmm.
But the ROI is with the team. And I've been very fortunate over the years that I worked with some of the best teams. It didn't matter what organization I was in, at DMR in Ottawa, at BEA, at Oracle. We always had among the best of the people in the team. And it just worked out that way because I was lucky that they were all so cooperative. But it's the result of thinking about them first, helping them succeed, giving them the tools, the training. That's the secret to servant leadership. And it's not rocket science, really, I think. But anyway, there's a
It's
whole
not.
philosophy if people ought to read it. Mr. Greenleaf came up with that some years ago, but there's a lot more written about it now. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And there's probably a lot of other names that are dancing around this topic, which, for example, there is a reference to the living systems aspect of helping something else helps ourselves,
Mhm.
called regenerative leadership, and it takes it a little bit a broader systems view where it's about living systems. It's not just people systems. So servant leadership is around serving people, but it's nested inside a greater whole of ecological imperatives, for example, and holds a position that the greater systems that we're a part of have work to do, and the greater systems are asking something of us.
Mhm.
So this might be a servant leader inquiry: is what is the greater system that I'm a part of? That's already a challenging question for people. And what is it asking of me? And that's part of the reciprocity with the greater whole that I'm
Mhm.
nested within, like concentric rings, that I have a role to play, and that role is continually changing based on what the greater system is needing or shifting or dealing with at the time. That's different than self-interest in a sense, but there is a unique offering I have to make. This is for me. I think this is the holy grail equation of what we're talking about, because how do I figure that out? One of the questions that had came up in the thriving communities work I've done in the past, um, is what is my purpose? What is my role in community? Work in terms of like having to go to work, make money, and then come back and live a life in community is kind of this side trip. But ultimately, where do I belong? Where is my place of belonging to place, to people, to land, to story, and what's my role in that place? And people struggle with it. It doesn't necessarily unfold at school, and it doesn't necessarily unfold at work, and maybe not even in religion. And so what's left? We have therapy, We have books to read, or maybe the movies just come in and fill in that gap so we don't have to do that work. But this is a big question. And so I've been thinking, all right, people spend a third of their life at work. Statistically, there's like, this is a big chunk of people's life. And I just saw this statistic today that 60% of people report covering up some or most of their personality at work, most of parts of who they are. So, okay, so you're spending, a third of your life spending covering up half or more of who you are in order for that get that return to actually be something in community. I don't even know what the aims are, but I imagine some life of fulfillment. So that's to me a really indirect route to what we're meant to be as awake humans. So what if we could reset the equation for a systems change at work that actually develops human uniqueness as work gets done with a higher bar awareness of the workplace's role or the company's role in greater systems that it's nested in. That could include democracy. It could include, global trade dynamics. It could include climate change. Obviously, sustainability has been trying its hardest. It's like the little train that could, but it's not the wholesale systems change shift we need. So, at the small level, in terms of servant leadership and people, uh, there's another key living systems principle called development, and another one called essence or uniqueness. So if we start piecing these together as a system, there is this role as a servant leader. I think I heard you mention this, that besides a transactional thing I need to do with somebody, there's this uh, attention on who they are. And if they're hiding 60% of themselves, you got to do more work to find out who that person is. Maybe it's offline, right? Or it's the pre-chat, it's the not official meeting. Um, and and in that exploration of who that person is, having them see themselves in it, invite them to express that somehow, because that's kind of the secret sauce to a thriving dynamic team is that people are bringing their uniqueness. But if everyone's trying to kind of like fit into a mold because they feel like they're having imposter syndrome, or they're faking it till they make it, or maybe there's an expectation of them being something that they're not because of culture, well, then we're really not working with the best of our teams and people. So how does that speak to what a servant leader, like an actual skill in terms of creating development for people to become their true self?
Yeah, well, that was a lot of great messages in what you just said there, Mark. Quite a few really, really good points. And I want to go back to trust,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to go back to also how do we tie into, since we're talking about work, how do you tie into the organization's bigger purpose? So I can say my role as a servant leader is to help my team be their best. Okay, but that still means that I have to do what the company expects me to do,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So we have to be aligned, right, with the company's objectives. And as a leader, that's my job, your job as a leader, to be able to say, okay, this is what the executive team has decided. That's a strategy. Let's go. We support all of that. Now, how do we make it happen? Then sometimes we'll uncover some issues that maybe weren't expected or something, but we have to deal with them, or else go back and make sure it's understood. But it's our role to make sure that what we do and what we try to accomplish supports the company's overall purpose and strategy. That's critical, and we don't want to miss that point, right? Now,
Well,
in a
that's
very
kind of the
large,
greater whole that we're tied to, obviously,
yeah,
right? The company
exactly.
whole.
Yeah, and in society, maybe it's not just that you happen to live on Melbrook Drive, but maybe you're part of a bigger community in your neighborhood, and you play an important role, and that's good too. Everything counts because, again, we are all connected. But a lot of that, goes back to establishing good relationships and establishing trust. And I mean, trust is gained; it's earned. You just can't ask for it. It's not going to work, right? Trust is earned, so you have to earn everybody's trust as a leader, and they have to earn your trust as a trustworthy person. And we maybe will go back to that if we have time in terms of remote work. What does that mean? Because that is the key element of making remote work effective. Is you have to have trust on both parties. Um, and
Well, I
we
think we
talk
could. I think we could take a tack there now because on the table right now is this Great Resignation statistic.
yeah,
Here, I'll pull it up here um, to give us a little context, and we'll go back to the remote work aspect. So, yeah, there was this article in Forbes that had this three really strong statements, and the first one is this isn't a flash in the pan phenomenon. What's happening is a big wake up call for employers, regardless of whether they thrived or languished during the pandemic. There's a larger trend that's taking shape in real time that speaks to the very heart of the employer employee compact. There's 9.2 million job openings, but employers can't fill them. And consider a record 4 million people quit their jobs last April. There's no shortage of job seekers. So what's going on there, right? It's almost just like there's a informal unionizing move happening, and they're starting to somehow see each other like an emergent property in a system. And there's this mismatch going on between employers and employees. So this is some of the dynamics that are taking place. The second big statement is that the workforce and the workplace is forever changed. Like it or not, we're really not going back. I think there was some bait around that in the beginning. Now we really see the entrenchment of life through Zoom and remote work meetings and asynchronous channel development. And how do we work with this as a more permanent aspect of work life? And obviously, that's still unfolding of how each company is doing that. So that's kind of an invitation to not have your head in the sand, but to actually experiment and to develop. So this is where your comment comes in, and then the third is around. This is the statement that really strikes me is that we need to care for our employees. So there's a large investment here around connection and care with your people, and at every level, from frontline workers all the way up to the top, and the inequities that took place throughout those different levels of your organization. And in the end, uh, you know, this depends on building a caring culture. So people at all levels of work want to experience mental health, positive mental health. And their lives outside of work and their need for connection with one another are still huge issues. So, in terms of attraction and retention, this is a big subject. So, I'm kind of putting all three of those back on the plate as you go into this conversation about remote work and work from home.
yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you, Mark. I
Yeah.
love to talk about this, and I love to hear um, reputable firms like Forbes, and there are many others, that talk about the fact that leaders have to care. And I've actually noticed that that is a positive aspect of the pandemic, despite all of the issues and loss of life and everything else. I think a lot of leaders have become more caring, more understanding, more compassionate, and are now empathic um, towards their employees, and some of them for the first time, right? They never realized that they needed to do that. But I think leaders saw it, and even colleagues saw it when people were all of a sudden forced from home and keep to work from home. Keep in mind, this was not planned, so people weren't prepared. And if we want this to work in the future, it's not going to be all remote or all back to the office. I've always maintained it'll be hybrid. And I wrote about that after I finished at Ceridian last year. I posted about that a few times. If we base the return to work policies on the experience of the pandemic, that's not good. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I may surprise people by saying that, but
Yeah, yeah. Say
that's
more about
not
that.
a it's not a positive experience. So don't base your policies based on a negative experience of remote work. We had positive remote work before the pandemic. The difference is that during the pandemic, you could never meet face to face. So we miss this connection. We need that human connection. I talk to you, Mark. We've never met. We connect. We click. That's great. But I'd love to meet you in person, shake your hand, right, and look you in the eye, maybe. But it's the same with our teams. And I always made it a point that the people who were in the same city as me, we would go for lunch, we'd get together for a drink. We'd have quarterly meetings as a group, that kind of thing. I would travel to other cities or in the US to see staff members. That is still needed. We can't forget that. Whatever return to work policy people develop, there has to be, if not an office space, they'll have to rent, hotel rooms or conference rooms, whatever. Which is
Mm-hmm.
why I think hybrid is the right mix. Maybe come to work. You've heard of 3-2-2, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, 2 days for the weekend, however that works for people. Maybe that's the option. I don't know. Um, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we can get to meet in person, it's a lot easier to establish strong relationships, even if it's only once in a while. And also, it's a great way to establish trust and get to know the person more.
Mm-hmm.
I've exchanged more personal discussions, and I shared my personal experience about things, and I've heard other people tell me theirs over a cup of coffee because they can be themselves. They don't have this facade that you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you face to face, it's really hard to have this facade. Maybe it's easier on Zoom because you can hide half the time, but or if you work remotely, you can hide half the time. But you shouldn't have this facade. You should be able to live and work as who you are as yourself intentionally, right? Just be natural. And I am who I am, and I'm the way I am, and
Mm-hmm.
I've always been. But I'm fine. I feel good in my skin. So not everybody says that, I know, but that's
No.
the way.
Right. I have so many fun things to comment. So the first is like this third major point, which is these are significant things this article is pointing at. The third one is we have to care. And our leaders have to care. And I was like, why do we have to say that? What does that say about how it actually is? I
Yeah,
don't think they're just talking circumstantially. I think they're really pointing at a humongous paradigm of how work got done. That caring was not part of work. That there's work and then there's home or something like that. And um, so we just kind of truncate all and in the language is even called soft skills,
yeah,
versus hard skills. So they're somehow um, less important perhaps. And the the development required to care is, where does that take place? How do I just do that from one day to the next if I'm patterned on my habits of what's allowed me to succeed in a former paradigm, a former world where caring didn't really matter, and now it's like, oh, I'm midlife and you're asking me to open up a whole other part of myself. I don't even have that kind of emotional intelligence. I've definitely bumped into that. So here's a little tool that I did once that revealed this to me. So I had a face to face retreat at the beginning of the pandemic, before it all kind of right before it happened. And so I was working on, when you're having one on one meetings with people, with your direct reports, how to actually spend a significant amount of attention on who the other person is and learning from them. And the instrument we were going to use is called an open ended question. And believe it or not, this actually was challenging when I said, okay, you're going to come up with three open ended questions, and you're going to restrain talking about yourself and restrain closed ended questions, which lead to either single answers or even just one answer, single word answers like yes or no. And so we went through the process in the first round. We had some content that we were working with too, but they were like, this is really hard. And I'm like, why is that? Why is that hard? And they're like, I just have never done this before. Like work doesn't require this of me. And and then I was like, well, what if you added not just open-ended questions, but questions where you were engaging in who is the uniqueness that this person is as I'm asking them about their work life right now. How would you figure that out? And again, we went deeper into it and they came back and they were like, I have never done this in a one-on-one meeting. And I've been working in this company for 25 years. So there are some specific things that we can do to build this ability, this capability, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the cultural patterns that have preceded this time. To just say just care is going to be a piece of work. So I was like, well, what percentage of work time should a leader advocate for to their uppers? Like I need 20% ongoing leadership development time. And that's not training. It's leadership development time where we're working on this kind of skill set because the ROI on it during the next unknown thing, because there's no way this is the last unknown thing we're going to deal with. It's going to
Oh,
be pandemic plus wildfire in your neighborhood and a flood, or economic collapse or political this or that. So what is the weightlifting developmental process, and how much time can I give this proactively? What do you think about that?
yeah, and that's really an interesting point, and very very few companies dedicate the amount of time required to that, and actually more and more companies don't even allow much time for training anymore, which is too bad, uh, because you know for too long companies have felt that people were replaceable, easily replaceable.
Right.
And and I want to bring up, I'll come back to your point, uh, but just as I think of it, as people resign, sometimes they do this deep dive save. You're familiar with that. So as make if somebody got an offer, so don't let them go. Make them a counter offer, right? Give them more money if they'll stay. I hate those. I
Mm.
really hate those because it's too late. You're recognizing the problem too late. By that time, the person's disconnected, and if they did take the money, it would only be short term because they're still not happy, obviously, right? And I worked in a company where I wanted to give somebody a a promotion and a raise off cycle, right? So it had to go up all the way
Oh
to
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
not
what
top
is this off
executive,
cycle business?
yeah, all the way up to almost to God. And the question that came back that floored me? The question that came back was, well, does this person have an offer for another job to go to? Why did that matter? That's not why I was recommending the promotion and the raise, right?
Revealing. It's revealing of what paradigm it is.
Oh, so that's a kind of culture that you really don't want. But I mean, we all been in those cultures, and I was blessed because as a team we did well despite that culture. We did very well. But anyway, so the business about caring is you always have to care, and development exercises that you're talking about, they should be experimental exercises, if I can call them that, in the sense that if you want somebody to learn portion of your job, like when you do succession planning, for example, succession development, I train people, and I tried a few times, train somebody to take my job in case I got run over by a bus, you never know, or got the virus. But so when you train somebody, get them to do part of your job or get them to go and represent you at the next executive committee meeting or something like that. And maybe they can present part of your presentation or they can give an update. That's where you learn the most, right? But it takes time. So if your people are committed heavily, and they already work 9, 10 hours a day, there's no time for that, right? And so it has to be a conscious effort to say we will make time for those things, and it's very very difficult. Very few people do. few companies do, but I think now, and that's one of the positive things that I'm hopefully seeing in the great resignation. And if you look at what do people want, going back to your question earlier, what are people looking for? People are looking for meaningful work, something that's valuable to them and they're aligned with the values of the company. For example, I would never work, pot is legal in Canada now, right? I wouldn't go and work for a pot shop just because I'm not into that kind of stuff, so I wouldn't feel comfortable. Uh, and I'm not, make any moral judgment, just my personal opinion. But you have to work for a company you believe in, a purpose you believe in. So you may remember, not sure how we're doing for time, but there's a little.
Yeah, let's be mindful that we have like maybe 3 minutes left, so we'll wrap this up and.
Okay, so anybody who's heard this song by Johnny Cash, where he says that he's installing wheels on Cadillacs, that is interesting because he's not really doing that. He is helping build a car. And today, with modern technology, you can build a car to somebody's exact individual specification. So if you're putting wheels on a car or whatever you're doing, you're part of a bigger picture. And I think that's what people want to know. How do I fit in this bigger picture? And here's how I want to help your company. But the company has to be able to say, here's how we can help you as an employee, right? We just don't want to take as companies have done for a long time. What can we do for you, the employee? We can offer you flexibility in your work schedule, flexibility in your work location. We can offer you opportunities to learn, to grow, all of those good things that we hear about. And we're going to run out of time. I realize that. But anyway.
We're solving the world's biggest problems right now.
Yeah.
But I like ending on that reflection that what people are looking for is a meaningful work life, work experience, and it's involves all of these topics that we spoke about: servant leadership, caring, developing employees, all of these kinds of things, and recognizing that we're in a new era, so we're going to have to be actively working on this. So, thanks for stirring the pot with me today, Jermaine.
It's been fun, and actually, it's still evolving. Right, it's far from
Yeah,
being over. It's still evolving.
Yeah,
We can have this discussion again in 6 months, and
let's do that.
it'll be different. And there's a lot of talk about the gig economy, and it's not for everybody because it's not always to people's advantage. There's some caveats there. So I really appreciate you having me on your podcast series, Mark. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks, Jermaine. How can people find out about you?
Basically, they can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn typically, and probably the easiest thing: LinkedIn, Twitter, and some people have my email. But yeah, be happy to help or provide some insight where I can.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for the people who attended here today, and for all of you watching the replay. We'll be posting more offers at the end of this whole series to stay engaged. So we're just getting started. All right. Ciao for now, everybody.
All right. Cheers.